The idea for this segment came about because towards the end of my, I call it, it's a course I call Constructing American Heroes, but it's basically my heroic monomyth or heroic archetypes class. And at the end of the class, I talk about the Paragon. And that's a sub archetype. It's a unique sub archetype because it's always and can only ever be aspirational. So if you stuck with me last episode towards the end, you heard the differences between the aspirational heroes versus the cathartic motivational heroes. Those are two basic overall distinctions, and there are a lot of sub archetypes that we'll talk about eventually throughout this year that go in between them. The Paragon is a specific archetype that can only ever be aspirational. A lot of the archetypes can be one or the other. You can be aspirational or cathartic motivational as a trickster or as a frontiersman, so forth. So, but the Paragon is always aspirational. And throughout the years, I've shown or had them read different works or I've shown different films or whatever to really help us break into and discuss the Paragon. This time around, though, for the first time, I had them look at Disney's Hercules. And what a great film that is, first of all. I remember loving it when it came out. It's such a well-done film. But it's a really interesting film because they've taken the Greek myth of Hercules, and it's not just, they Disneyfied it. No, there's some specific things going on here. What they did, they took the Greek story of Hercules and changed a lot of things and put it through the classic Superman story lens. A lot of things with that. I mean, he is the square-jawed classic Superman, who stands for truth, justice, and the American way, except it's Hercules in ancient Greece here. The woman who played Meg is doing a Lois Lane voice from the 40s. I mean, that's she's using that transcontinental accent. I mean, that's the diction. I mean, that's who she's supposed to be. She's supposed to be, she's Megara, but she's basically supposed to be a 1940s Lois Lane. And it's such a great film, because of a lot of those aspects. You've got the muses, who are so fun there and everything. And, of course, the gods and the titans and so forth. You've got the classic hero's journey. You've got Phil, the mentor. And one of the cool things about the film in terms of Hercules as a paragon, one of the things that are key to the subarchetype of the paragon is that a paragon has to, in the universe that they inhabit, in the fictional universe that they inhabit, the paragon has to be the symbol of what to strive for. A paragon's the ultimate symbol for everybody, all the characters in that universe. They know that that's somebody who will never let you down, who will always try to do the best they can, will always be self-giving, will always be there for you. That's the paragon. So, a Superman type character, a Captain America type character, in their universes, they are known for that. All aspirational heroes aren't necessarily paragons. The example I like to give is Naruto. If you know Naruto from anime or manga, he's a, they call him a knucklehead. He's a trickster archetype is what he is. He's always rushing in without thinking. He's making mistakes. He really, truly is a knucklehead. But he's aspirational. He's aspirational because Naruto, from the very beginning, never even conceives of maybe we should do the wrong thing, or maybe we shouldn't do the right thing. Maybe it's not good to do, maybe we shouldn't self-give, this and that. He's got his ninja way, and he will always try to do what's right. He's a bonehead about it sometimes, but he's such a fun character. He's a trickster. He blurs boundaries, and yet he's aspirational. He's not a paragon, though, because if you look in the universe of Naruto, no one's looking at Naruto as the one symbol of greatness and virtue and something to be, an example for us all to strive for in every way. He does inspire people. That aspirational hero has to inspire people, but it's not at that paragon level in terms of society in general in that universe. Like it is in Hercules. Certainly is like that in Hercules and other, He-Man, Luke Skywalker to the Star Wars and the proper way the Star Wars universe is supposed to be carried out in the EU and so forth. So that's the character of Hercules, and he's a great example of this sub-archetype, and I show him for that. But it is an interesting story because it brings about an interesting point that where did the aspirational paragon really come from? And I teach American heroic archetypes because we look at the monomyth, and we've done that in this podcast so far. We looked at the monomyth, and then we look at the American monomyth in particular. And in that American monomyth, it's been exported to a certain extent throughout the world, through Hollywood and the entertainment industry and everything. But it really is a distinctly American invention in terms of this distinct American monomyth, this self-giving, the very Christ-like foundations of the hero who will 100% self-sacrifice, no questions asked, will always do the right thing because they know that they should do the right thing, right? It might be difficult. They might make a mistake and do something they thought was the right thing or whatever, but their heart's always in the right place and they're always striving to do the right thing, and they don't hesitate to give of themselves. And a lot of people think this character just falls flat today. You know, we talked about that last episode with the difference between just basic aspirational and cathartic motivational heroes. But I was thinking, you know, where does this hero come from? There is, you know, in Shelton Lawrence in Jewett's book on the American monomyth, which is a numbskull book in a lot of ways. They talk a lot of stuff they don't know what they're talking about, but they do identify the idea of the American monomyth rather well. And they do point out, and it's a good thing to point out, that there's a very Christ figure element to the American idea of the monomyth. And Christ figure meaning that it's somebody who self-sacrifices, is willing any time to lay their life down for somebody else. And we see that throughout history and fiction. You know, there's some traces of like the American monomyth going back to, say, Sir Galahad and stuff like that. But really, outside of Christianity, we really don't see, to my knowledge, that's 100% self-giving, doing the right thing because it's always the right thing to do kind of hero. I mean, you think about Beowulf or the original Greek stories, you know, whether Norse or Greek mythology, the heroes wanted to do heroics. You know, maybe to a certain extent they wanted to save a person or do the right thing, but it was really about achieving eternal life. They could achieve eternal life through their deeds. If they achieved enough feats within their life, if they were the subject of enough poems or ballads or whatever, then they could achieve a kind of eternal life. Throughout the eternity, we'd still be telling their stories. And to some degree, that's true, right? We still talk about the Battle of Troy. We still talk about Achilles and Beowulf and things like that. So in a lot of the Western world, pre-Christian or, you know, extra-Christian world of the Western world anyway, we really don't have this idea of the American monomyth aspirational hero traced. You can only trace it back through some Christian stories. And even then, it really doesn't fully come to bear until we get to the history of the United States of America, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm not a great specialist on a lot of Eastern myths and stories and whatnot. So, you know, if you think you know of this or that Japanese or Indian, you know, this or that story or character that you think would meet that criteria, let me know, because I'd be interested in hearing about that. But it's interesting to think about the United States, just to give a mini little history lesson, and this is very much a dime store history lesson. You know, real history experts and enthusiasts would easily know, oh, you could flesh that out more and say more about, but you said that, but it's really more like this. I'm just giving a very, very, you know, encapsulated summary of the history here, though. But you had different people settling what would become the United States, at least these 13 original colonies on the East Coast, coming from different places and from different cultures and from different types of lives and life values. You did have, say, in Virginia and some of the southern colonies, the Anglicans coming over, and they were coming over for more business ventures, wanted to either find gold or ship out tobacco and whatnot, and it was more of like a business venture. You had religious freedom was a big thing for a lot of people coming over. You did have the Puritans, the Pilgrims coming over at Plymouth, and they were fleeing the persecution, as they saw it, from the Anglican Church, and they wanted to exercise and practice their Calvinism, Christian way of life, the way they wanted to, and freedom. And you even had religious freedom, you know, in places like Maryland, you know, a Catholic, you know, settling Maryland, and Catholics, they weren't welcome, or they couldn't practice Catholicism, certainly not in puritanical New England or you know, Williamsburg, Virginia, or anything like that, you know. So there were a lot of people fleeing for certain freedoms and whatnot. But they all had some sort of strain of Christianity, right? Whether it's Anglicanism, Catholicism, or even Calvinism. And you could go deeper into this, and I think it's a fascinating topic, and I'm always kind of wanting to learn more about this. But to see how each one of those different angles on Christianity brought something unique to American culture. For example, you might not have heard the phrase anymore, but it used to be a thing that a lot of Americans were proud of. They would call it the American work ethic, meaning that Americans will get out there and they, maybe it's not the case anymore, but the idea was the American work ethic was that you could, as part of the American dream, that's why people wanted to come to this country, because here you could come and work and create a better life for yourself. It was possible. And, there are all kinds of, challenges in the way, and maybe it's not as possible now as it was then or whatever. But just historically, there was an idea of the American dream and the American work ethic. You could come here, you could make something of yourself. You could gain your own, fortune, so to speak, air quotes there. And that was part of the manifest destiny, idea, kind of played into that some more. Social mobility is really what it's called in terms of history. The idea that, from the old world, you were born into a class, you were a peasant or you were aristocracy or whatever. You were just born into that class, and you didn't, it was very rare that people crossed over from classes. But in the new world, social mobility was there. You could come here with nothing, and if you were able to work your way up, think Ben Franklin, for example, just a runaway at one point, but learned the printing industry and really made something of himself, and then, delved into the science and whatnot and became this great name. We have so many stories about that. That's social mobility. And a lot of that comes from the Puritans with their distinct version of Calvinism, which is interesting. It might seem like how do these two things connect? But the Puritans, there's when you say Calvinism today, there's so many different strains of Calvinism, and somebody who might call themselves a Calvinist might not necessarily believe all of this or are in the same way or to the same degree or whatever. But the basic Calvinism of the Pilgrims, the Puritans, was that we were all predestined. God had created some people basically to go to heaven and some people to go to hell. And of course you hoped, it's a silly idea, right? But of course you hoped that you were one of the elect. You hoped that you were, somebody that God had predestined to go to heaven. And the only way to know that is that if you were predestined to go to heaven, then you'd be blessed in this life. So you really wanted to work hard, and you wanted to try to make it known that you were successful, with your farm, with your whatever. Because if you were successful, if you were blessed, then people around you would know that you're one of the elect. And of course, that would help you in Puritan society as well. Oh, this person, of course they're a godly person. Look how blessed they are, and so forth, And it's just that, I know it's a really weird idea. But from that came this idea, the American work ethic was originally called the Puritan work ethic, or the Protestant work ethic, it was sometimes called, the idea of just trying to move up that social ladder, which isn't a bad thing, doing well for yourself and trying to put in the hard work and be successful isn't a bad thing. But, throughout time, there have been some sort of nefarious motives behind it. But that idea that we can do the work and then place that in context with the basic Christian story that we should all be laying our lives down for each other at any given time. Bring in the more Catholic aspect of it, to some degree Anglican. It's more Catholic, but you'd find it more in Anglicanism than you would say in Puritanism. But the idea that there's a redemptive nature of suffering, and that we can live our lives as a sacrifice to God. And within Christianity, the idea that, of course, Jesus laid down his life for everyone, and we're called to do the same, not necessarily to die, but to lay down our life for God first, but then also for those around us. And you're starting to see the connection with the American monomyth hero. It's an honor to lay your life down for somebody, and that for some people, in a martyrdom situation or whatever that might mean, going and trying to save somebody, running into a burning building, for example, a fireman. But for most of us, it basically means getting out of our comfortable bed in the morning and seeing to our children, or going to visit, our neighbor or a family member or a friend that is lonely, or, doing something, just doing your job well because you know that people need you in your job and they depend on you or something. Everything you do in life, you can't just get up and do whatever the heck you want to do. That's not living. That's not living. That's living 100% for yourself selfishly. And that's not where happiness comes from. To really give of yourself in others, that you can look at this from a religious aspect or even just an atheistic. If you're a total materialistic atheist, you can still look at how humans have evolved as social creatures. And if we're going to thrive and find happiness, whatever that is, right, you're going to have to self-give of yourself in a social setting, a family, a tribe, or something. That's just how we work. Nobody goes out and lives 100% by themselves, doing whatever they want by themselves because that's just what they want to do. I mean, you could put another context like a hermit or somebody who's thinking of what they're doing as though they're laying their lives down for other people spiritually in prayer or whatever. But, just to totally live for yourself and nobody else, that doesn't bring anybody fulfillment. So it's easy to see let's couple that selfless nature from Christianity, informed by the different strains and angles of Christianity, and then liken that or connect that to the idea that it's really important to work hard and to do your best at the things you do. Take pride in your work and whatnot. And you start to piece together the American monomyth. And it's interesting to look at some of the original folk tales from early America, or some of the settlers and pilgrims, immigrants, or whatever. Stories like John Bunyan, John Henry, trying to think of some others, Johnny Appleseed. You see the seeds of it there, and then it's even more interesting when you see different tellings of those folk tales throughout the centuries or the decades, and you see how they even become more and more and more molded into this American monomyth structure. I think it's something, specifically as Americans, it's something at our core of our psychology, at our culture, and I think even deeper than that, it's something at the human nature anyway. It's in the human experience. I think it's just developed in a very visceral way with the history of American culture. And I'm not being exclusive when I say that, because like I said, the idea of the American monomyth has been exported now everywhere. It's better received some places than it is others. But we're living in this time now at which it's very much sneered at, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it brings me so much, pain when I hear people say, "Oh, that's so two-dimensional. We need to be more realistic. We need to, deconstruct these heroes and make them." It is important, as we said in the last episode. It's very important to have good, solid, cathartic, motivational heroes who do screw up and who don't always make the right decisions. And then they show us that even when we screw up and don't make the right decisions, or we acted a little selfishly sometimes, that we can do better. That's important. We need those characters. But we need true aspirational Paragon heroes to stand up for the standard of what is right. We need to see that standard lived out by just at least fictional heroes, so that we can have that standard in mind, and we can always be striving for that standard, even if we don't make it all the time. I mentioned that some of this is sort of a recap from last episode at the end with the aspirational versus cathartic motivational talk. But we are seeing it in today's society a lot more. We're separated, we're isolated a lot more from each other. Part of that's technology, part of that, certainly having gone through the pandemic. And I'm not, arguing for, we need to be a total commune of tribalism. Hey, like I've said before, I've never met somebody more introverted than myself. I deal with certain, levels of social anxiety and whatnot. I love my isolation. But I do know the importance of being a social creature. I know the importance of giving of ourselves to others and living for others, and why that's important. Certainly from a spiritual perspective, if you're spiritual, if you're Christian like I am, but also just from a psychological health perspective. I want to read you just as a quote. This is a quote from Pope Paul VI. So obviously a religious figure here, but we can apply it to even, I think, people who aren't from a religious background. He said, "Technological society has succeeded in multiplying the occasions of pleasure." So technological society has succeeded in multiplying the occasions of pleasure, but finds great difficulty in giving birth to happiness. For happiness has its origin elsewhere. It is a spiritual thing. Money, comfort, hygiene, material security, etc. may often be lacking, but nevertheless, despite these advantages, boredom, suffering, and sadness are frequently to be found supervening in the lives of many people. So the idea is that you can be happy and maybe not have wealth, maybe not have, a lot of the comforts and basic securities of life. On the other hand, you can have those securities, you can have that wealth, you can have everything you dreamed of and not be happy. And it's that, so that should show you logically that happiness lies somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily lie in success or in obtaining things, creature comforts and whatnot. Those are necessary for survival, and they're certainly uh, a contributor to psychological health. But real happiness is somewhere else. And as Pope Paul says, it's a spiritual thing. Even if you don't believe in the spirit, you got to believe in the psyche, right? The development of the human mind. However you want to conceive of it. We do have certain ways of thinking and ways of being that have developed. That's why we're social creatures. You can look at the history of man and the evolution of it and everything. So happiness is elsewhere. And where is happiness? Well, the American monomyth shows us that it's in self-giving. It's in finding family, whether or not it's just your actual family or just a family in a community or something like that, of mutual self-giving. That's what the American monomyth hero shows us. So I would challenge you, if you've never seen Disney's Hercules, go watch it. It's amazing. But even if you saw it, whatever, rewatch it and think about the original Hercules story and how the original Hercules was a typical Greek hero. He was a bit hapless. He had a heroic or tragic virtue, like a lot of the heroes do. He was duped a lot of the times. He was, of course, in a constant struggle with Hera because she didn't like the fact that Zeus fathered him with a human woman. But he was a precursor in terms of the son of God mythologies. He was a son of God, a son of Zeus, come to Earth to live as one of us and to perform his heroism here, helping us, serving us and stuff like that. So there's that element of a Christ-like character within him already. And you can certainly see elements of Superman in that, coming from the sky. His father sent him to Earth, And so it's so cool to see Disney's Hercules make use of the connections between the original Hercules myth and the Superman story. It's if you're a Superman fan at all, you got to watch Disney's Hercules. It's one of those movies like The Iron Giant. It's a great Superman movie that's not a Superman movie. So I definitely recommend it. Go check it out. I could go farther with this topic. We could really delve into some even more nuances, but I've talked enough about it already. This is just a podcast, so let's leave it there.